further discussion. We'll move on. Thank you, Bob. Let's move on to the city manager's report.
So the only thing I want to remind folks is that we are looking to do appointments to the boards and commissions at the next meeting. So we'll have 3 from the Parks and Rec Board. We'll have 2 with the BZA, and we have 1 with the Planning Commission. So again, if you know of anybody who might be interested, please encourage them to submit an application. And the application, basically a resume and a letter of interest and qualifications. And like I said, we hope to bring that back at the next meeting.
And I noticed those are on the website, correct?
They are.
Very good. Thank you, Darrell. Let's move on to the police chief's report.
I have nothing.
All right. Always good. Okay, so we're going to move on to 3163 Route 9 sewer line vote schedule. I will say this, following that, I'm going to change the agenda around a bit, and we will go on to the city statement on proposed Rockwool facility. For right now, let's bring up 3163 Route 9 sewer line vote schedule follow-up.
All right, so this is follow-up, obviously, to the last meeting we had. There were 3 questions that were requested. We've had the Charlestown Utility Board do the research on those questions, and so we'll have Kristen come up to do an explanation on that. We did also get a request for the loan agreement or the form of the loan agreement. As you can see in the packet, we don't have that yet, but that request has been put into the West Virginia Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council. So we don't have that piece of information yet, but hopefully we can address other questions that were asked. So with that, Kristen, if you'll come on up. She will, I think, be referring to this map that's behind us here. Each of the members also has a copy of that map on their desk.
Good evening. So certainly as a follow-up to the last City Council meeting, we wanted to address some of the specific questions that you had regarding the financing for the Route 9 sewer project, as well as some definitions and other items that we had previously presented. What I wanted to do was prepare an exhibit to demonstrate where the Route 9 sewer project is going, the customers that it would serve as currently designed. As you can see, the sewer project serves much more than the Rockwool facility. The line is designed for approximately 900,000 gallons per day. So that addresses largely the industrial park, the Jefferson Orchards property, and adjacent properties, several residential developments, all the way from the Jefferson Orchards property down to Fairfax Crossing, which is the tie-in. So certainly happy to answer any questions with regard to that exhibit, but hopefully that will provide a little bit more clarity on the current design. The summary that we've prepared addresses the funding option, the state funding option, and alternative options for providing Rockwool sewer capacity. So state funding option, currently the commitment is $10.5 million for a term of 30 years, no impact to the ratepayers for the total project costs, and the operation and maintenance costs are retained by the utility board to maintain the system. Any unpaid balance at the end of the 30-year term is forgiven. One thing we did want to address is that we did an evaluation of the original commitment letter, which was $9 million for 20 years, compared to the current commitment of $10.5 million over 30 years, and essentially what that would work, the difference would work out to about 23 years, 3 months. So maybe something to consider in negotiating with the state as to where we end up with the 30-year commitment term. I know, Mr. Trainer, that was one of your questions at some point, so we did want to provide that comparison. There are other options for the financing of the sewer line, a mainline extension agreement, Rule 5.5. We've gone through that extensively. We did want to provide essentially 2 potential options under that mainline extension agreement. One is current design. The second option would be a line that would only serve Rockwool. So there are ratepayer impacts with regard to the option one, which is the sewer project as currently designed. Those are detailed here. Happy to address any questions on that. Option two would then be a line that would just be sized for Rockwool. So that has not been, we have not gone through the calculations of what that would be. Engineering would be required to evaluate that option and the rate impact associated with that. There was one question, I believe, by Councilman Brittingham regarding the ability of the utility board to go back to the PSC and ask for relief from the, for additional costs. So with the mainline extension agreement, utility board does not get the operation and maintenance costs associated with the line during the term of the agreement. I have spoken with a senior PSC staff member, and their opinion, they cannot speak for the commission, but they would, their opinion would be that they would deny the utility board that request based on alternative funding being available. Then getting into the alternate mainline extension agreement, that is a mutual agreement between the utility board and the developer. So that's another option, but at this point, you know, we haven't evaluated that with the developer to determine where that option would end up with regard to rate impacts or, you know, the developer covering costs and the term of that option. So just wanted to address that. Permitting, we do not have any updates on the issuance of the permit at this point. We're waiting on DEP to issue the permit modification with any conditions. We did want to make note that if the DEP permit is not issued, if the modification is not issued, the financing commitment from the state would not be available, nor would sewer availability, as that was a condition of the sewer availability letter by the utility board. Then getting into a few of the questions. I don't know whether you want me to go through these specific questions or if, okay. So the first question, it was, is the utility board obligated to modify the permit to accept industrial waste? The answer is yes. The utility board is obligated to provide service as contained in Chapter 24, Article 3. We've attached those requirements. The permit modification is required as part of the provision to provide the service to any industrial customer or any customer. The DEP processes obligate the filing of the permit renewal application 6 months prior to the expiration of the permit, and we would then require any permit modifications for major changes in the system. If the permit modification is returned to the utility board by DEP, we would have to respond and provide any additional information if they had questions. We would still remain under the obligation to provide the service until such time as DEP would deny the permit. And that is, you know, we're still waiting for the response from DEP.
So let me go back just a little bit. You mentioned that if DEP does not issue the permit, then the funding for the sewer line goes away.
That's correct. We have to have all permits in hand in order to obtain the state financing commitment.
Which is logical.
For instance, DEP permit, railroad permits, all of that.
But they could appeal the decision, correct? Or pre-treat or something else?
Correct, correct.
So if the funding, though, if the state backs out of the funding, there's a, you know, the big white elephant in the room is the $1 million of ransom.
The project costs would have to be addressed.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Kristen,
Yes.
Two questions. First, through no fault of his own and through my fault, I received some additional information on the 5.5 issue, and I would like to submit it for Mr. Levy and ask that you do a review. You did provide some information here, but there were some additional issues that I'd like some clarification on, because I'd like to get this issue really nailed down and there be no issues with that. Secondly, I think I asked last time, and the answer was that very little work had been done on the analysis and the work for the Flowing Springs project. Where are we on that?
Again, we're waiting on a direction with regard to the Route 9 sewer project to determine how, in what form the Flowing Springs project would need to be to address the capacity issues in the region.
So we have the Route 9 line and the Flowing Springs line and the consolidation, all three of those issues.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So
And with
Council-
regard to your first question, certainly if you have additional information that you'd like clarification on, just please provide it in writing. Daryl can get it to us at the board meeing tomorrow and
I'll
happy
get
to
it to
address.
Thank you.
And I just want to clarify, so this is in addition to the comments that he'd previously raised, because they have done an analysis on those earlier
Yes,
issues.
It is
Okay.
yes. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is the Charlestown Utility Board obligated to accept industrial waste? We are required to accept industrial waste unless there is a negative impact on our system. So again, DEP is evaluating any potential impacts with the permit modification. Unless there is an impact to our system, we are absolutely required to accept industrial waste. We cannot legally deny service to a new customer in the event even that we had capacity issues or that there were impacts. The developer would be responsible for covering those costs, and at that point we would be required to provide service. Any questions on that?
Guess we can move to 3.
Sure. Please provide a clear definition of customer. Are industrial customers different from residential and commercial customers? Customer in the PSC rules is defined as any such person, firm, corporation, municipality, public service district, or any other entity who purchases a product or services of any utility and shall include any such person, firm, corporation, municipality, public service district, or any other entity who purchases services or product for resale. The sewer rules do define commercial and residential services, but there is no definition or distinction between for an industrial service. The assertion that sewer rule 5.5 does not apply to industrial customers, I think that was a comment that was made. We do not agree with that. There's nothing in the statute that governs, in the governing rules, that would differentiate between industrial customers. Next question was a need for a clear definition of industrial waste versus domestic waste. Again, the PSC rules do not differentiate between any industrial or domestic waste. Essentially, sewer that goes into the sewer infrastructure is waste, and it's dealt with through the DEP regulations.
So why do we need this variance then, this permit? You know what I'm saying?
Correct. So the permit modification addresses an industrial user. It's no different than the PSD has 5 industrial users. It's just it's a way to monitor the effluent from something other than a domestic use. For instance,
we talked about 2. Well,
Okay.
there you go. I mean, that's right there. But we talked about 2 streams always on this particular project, right? There was the industrial waste stream, and then there was the domestic waste stream. So
They-
there's got to be some kind of differentiation, difference there.
Well, the utility board requested that Rockwool provide 2 separate monitoring devices on the domestic flow, so we could evaluate that, as well as the industrial flow. Those go through those flow monitoring devices into a single line. So they essentially come within the building, the large footprint, those come into a single line out of the building.
Why would we need it if there's no difference between the waste streams?
The PSC does not have a definition. DEP does have a definition.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you. That clarifies.
I was like, oh, that's what.
Move on to 5.
Sure. So our environmental attorney, Richard Lewis, sent 4 cases that pertain to the utility board's obligation to provide service to customers. There was a question about what case law would be available dealing with industrial users. The PSC rules define an applicant applying for service as a person, firm, corporation, municipality, PSD, or any other entity that applies for sewer service. So there's no distinction made between an applicant that is applying for, say, domestic or residential, commercial, or industrial service. The PSC case law does not distinguish a public utilities service obligation based on the type of service. So therefore, we were not able, can't say that there is no case law, but most cases apply for the generic applicant requesting service. Hopefully that clarifies that issue. And then the only other item we did want to cover with regard to the loan agreement, I believe that you're working with John Stump on a response, but we have an ongoing conference call with the state to give updates on the financing. So per the IJDC legal counsel, the lease agreement is between council and the building commission. Upon approval of the state financing, we would then be able to go to bid. At that point, once we have final bids and we know the final number of the financing, the loan agreement would be finalized and sent to the building commission for signature. That is standard practice and has been done through many other SRF projects that Charlestown has done. So that's not uncommon. Just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Right, so, and John Stump is asking that we accelerate that a little bit because he knows that we have council members asking to at least see the form of the loan agreement.
All right, any additional questions for Christian?
I just wanted to clarify the timing of voting between and maybe you can't answer maybe it's not you to answer the question, but it has to do with the building commission's vote versus the city council's vote. Is the city council votes first and then the building commissioner, or is it the other way around?
So we've set up the schedule so the city council would vote first. Because again, what we would like is the city council, basically it's a vote to authorize the building commission to issue the bonds and to enter into a lease agreement. And we really think that it's important that the city council, determine the policy direction of the city before the transactional work of the building commission is done.
Okay, thank you.
All my questions are about the spreadsheet analysis. I don't know if I should be directing that to Mr. Kunkel or you.
Well, he is the
Tag
one that
team or-
prepared the analysis. We can certainly try to work through those questions.
Are there any other questions on the other items before we jump to that analysis?
Just one more. February of 2017, the Public Service Commission hearing down in Charleston on the Flowing Springs project. The one thing in watching that I learned was that a sewer line does not get used all the time. In other words, there's not constantly stuff flowing through this pipe. It's the pumps are turned on at a certain point when you've accumulated so much waste within the pump stations. So you've built a line, you've designed this line to be, you said, for 900,000 gallons a day?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the current capacity, or what is the current usage of all of these customers now?
There would be some immediate customers. Ideally, you'd have Rockwool, which would be a customer, and then immediate flows into the line with the connection of the industrial park. There are other developments that are not currently built out, but there's the provision for upgrading to, there's a series of force mains, so a smaller force main going to a larger, so we have the ability to utilize a smaller line in the short term and serve ultimate build out within the various force main lines.
So right now, other than Rockwool, there will be no one else on that line.
Well, now that the provision was made in the sewer design to immediately connect the industrial park. So you'd have all of the industrial park flows. You'd have flows from, for instance, the Jefferson High School. So no, I mean, there will absolutely be immediate flows connected now that we have the public service district customers. We can make that connection.
And those customers will not be impacted by the rate, the existing customers.
The existing customers would not contribute to the revenue repayment of this particular item because those customers are already attributed to the PSD bonds.
So if Rockwool went and we built a line only for Rockwool, there would still be capacity that you would be pumping through that line because Rockwool won't be using that line 24 hours a day, correct?
No, you can't look at it from that perspective. You have to basically assume that the capacity in the line is to serve a particular customer. So to get to the point to say that you would pump from another location in the time that Rockwool wasn't using it, you can't anticipate that. You have to designate capacities in the line strictly for a particular user.
Okay, no, that makes sense. But just to be clear, all of these yellow sections then, there is right now, except for Burr and maybe with Jefferson High School, there is none of this has been built out yet. This is all planned.
Well, correct. I mean, there are a number of other PSD users that exist that would connect into the line. I don't have those right in front of me, but we did a detailed analysis based on the sewer design, and that is what's shown on the exhibit.
And Harvest Mills, that's all the way on.
Harvest Mills is not currently developed.
But is that, would that be incorporated into the Flowing Springs line, or is that into the Route 9 line?
We would anticipate that with this design, Harvest Hills would connect in and be required to extend service to their property. The developer would be required to do that and connect into this main extension.
As opposed to Flowing Springs.
That is the current plan.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that? So based on what you just said, so that's if the current engineering plan is all those good things where we're going to tie in Burr Industrial and all that. And 5.5 won't do that? Is that what we're saying?
There's two options under 5.5.
Let's go to the first 5.5, not the alternate, but just the first one.
Okay, so the first 5.5, there's still two options. It could be project as designed, or it could be Rockwool could come and say, we only want to pay for a line that will serve our building.
So let's say that they come back and say, okay, if for some reason the bond thing doesn't work out, and they go, okay, well, we'll build it just like you have it designed, would the people that we connect then, like Burr Industrial, would their rates be impacted by that project?
I can't, I mean, yes. I mean, we've defined, and John Kunkel can go through that. There would be an impact to the ratepayers based on Rule 5.5.
Be an impact for all ratepayers,
Yes.
not just.
Right, but I mean, they're hooking up. So right now, so if the bond goes through, you're going through the industrial park, no rate impact to those existing customers. If you do a 5.5 alternative, I guess, where the company or the entity decides to do it just as designed, then there would be a rate impact.
Yes.
Thank you.
If it's a lower cost alternative project, that doesn't really alter the reimbursement method. New customers connected onto that smaller design line would still be required to reimburse.
Right, I was saying, if he had built it as designed. And I appreciate all the work that you've done to put this together. It's good information, appreciate it.
So but you're saying, John, new customers, correct?
Correct.
Because I really want to nail this down. Existing customers, what will be the impact?
Under option 1, which is the,
Both option 1 and option 2. Is there any?
it would be a rate impact in either scenario for all.
And could you go through that again? Why?
Well, the utility board would be required to fund under Rule 5.5 approximately $442,000 and the O&M costs. So that would have to be attributed to all of the customers in that scenario.
So the O&M, you said, so that's $500,000 plus the O&M.
Actually, right. Well, no, that's just the utility funded portion under Rule 5.5 is approximately $442,000. The O&M costs above and beyond the leak adjustment, which we did do a revised analysis on that, the impact is $1.5 million. So essentially what it ends up being is a 42-cent impact to all ratepayers.
And that million that you just mentioned, and that is, how does that come out in terms of the ransom $1 million?
It does, that is strictly an O&M calculation on the sewer line as designed, based on 61% of the revenues going into the line. Doesn't have anything to do with the project costs.
Okay.
And Kristen, just to make sure, we're 42 cents per thousand?
42 cents per 1,000 gallons per month.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
That's basically what this analysis is showing, right, Mr. Kunkel, is the 5.5 agreement, if the project costs were $10 million, and if Rockwool was putting down the deposit and we were paying our cash portion, correct?
That's right. The utility board would incur 42 cents per thousand usage, which is not built into the current rates.
Okay. And I apologize for anybody in the audience, because without the agenda packet, this is going to be a really boring conversation. It's all about the numbers on this spreadsheet. But do you have the spreadsheet, Mr. Kunkel?
Yes, I do.
Where you at, Mike?
Packet page 34. And 35.
Can't see that.
So before he jumps into that, just to be clear, so again, Mr. Levi had questioned, I think, the original analysis that was done. We tried to go back and address that with the revised analysis. So you've seen an earlier version of this. I think Mr. Kunkel, again, basically taking into account the questions that were raised by Mr. Levi. That's the reason we're looking at this document one more time.
All right. So my first question is, this is a repayment schedule on page 34 of the net revenues minus the leak adjustment as to what we would be reimbursing Rockwool at the top, correct?
That's correct. You're, just so I'm clear, you're looking at page 2 and 3 of my analysis?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so my first question is, when it's labeled as gross revenues down here at the bottom, or not the bottom, second line down, that's not actually the gross revenues for the line, that's the gross revenues that the repayment is based off of. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so the gross revenues from the line are actually much higher than that, correct?
Well, okay, the numbers that are in the upper portion that are shown throughout the payback year are gross revenues less the leak adjustment.
Yes, so those are net revenues, but only for the repayment, not for the total gross revenue that the line will be grossing, just what we're required to pay to Rockwool, correct?
That's correct, but I
So
did...
for instance, and let me just get there, in the first year that one of the payments drops off, 2027, it's not that that CTUB is not still billing for that $41,000 and we're not still receiving that $41,000. It's just that that $41,000 is no longer obligated to go to Rockwool because it's been the 5 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
If you look at the payback related to, for instance, 2021, you'll see that runs for a 5-year period.
Yep.
2022 through 2026. Starting in 2027, that revenue does not go away. It will be revenue of the utility board.
And so why then, I guess I'll get to my first question, why then, when we look at the net unrecovered Rockwool reimbursement of 1.7, it's kind of the main figure you got to at the end, where on packet page 35, the next page, where you kind of make your conclusions about that analysis.
Yes.
And I apologize because I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the two. So that 1.7 million that's not recovered, that doesn't include any of the additional gross revenues that we received.
It does. I backed those out after the 5-year reimbursement period ends.
Where are those backed out? You have the approximate cost of extension is $10 million. You have the CTUB share of cost is $442,000. That leaves 9.5 for Rockwool. Then you have Rockwool's reimbursement of 5.9. That leaves 3.6. You say the unfunded CTUB cost is $2 million, and the net unrecovered Rockwool reimbursement is 1.7. And the 1.9, the unfunded CTUB cost of service, matches up perfectly to the total unfunded cost of service on the previous page, which was arrived by calculating just the net revenues, not the gross revenue. Because if you add in all those missing blank spots at the top for the revenues that we still receive all those revenues that are listed there in all those blank spots, those equal $2.2 million. So it's $2.2 million more dollars than what is shown here of the 4.7. That's not the gross revenue. That's the gross revenue that we have to pay back to Rockwool.
In my analysis, when revenues are freed up, they are, I believe, in the calculation. I could go back and review the details and...
I think we should do it right now. I mean, this is not, it's not an accurate depiction. And so if we take that $2.2 million in gross revenue, we times that by your 61% operation and maintenance, we get about $1.3 million. So we got to take $1.3 million off to get to our net revenue. That leaves $860,000. So really, the net unrecovered Rockwool reimbursement is not 1.7. It's about $875,000 that we've lost in the 11-year repayment. And what I'd like to do is after this meeting, I'll contact you, and I hope we could sit down and we can go over this together and provide a more accurate depiction of the costs. Because where I want to get to is that if we go the state funding route, Mr. Kunkel, for what you say, 23 years and 3 months.
Sir, if I could
course.
just go back to your question. If you look at the line item, less released revenues,
Yep.
those are the released, you can see in year 2027 that released revenues are $45,040.07.
Yep.
You can see, if you look at the progression on year 2021, that that's the first year that revenues would be released from the reimbursement, and you can see that it's netted off.
No, it's not. I'm sorry.
It'd be the 434, 422.16 if we're looking at year 2027. Okay, we take the leak adjustment off because the utility board would be keeping that, 62,142.01, and you take off the released revenues of 45,482.48 to come down to the operating deficit to the utility board.
Then how are you coming up with the total unfunded cost of service of $1.9 million? Two more lines down. How are you coming up with the total unfunded cost of total $1.9 million? What's the equation to figure that number out?
Okay, what that represents is just the progression of years in the payback year, and also the progression of years that debt service would be required on the utility board's share, that $35,040.24.
Yes.
But you can see, if you look at that less released revenues line item, you can see how that increases substantially during the later years.
Yes, but this continues on past that, not just year 11. We still make all those revenues past year 11.
I agree with you. What I was trying to show was what the negative impact to the utility board would be during the payback years. After the year 2031, it turns. You can see that it actually turns in year 2030, that instead of a deficit, there is a surplus of $82,307.97.
Where are you pointing to? Okay.
So it's going to flip, but what I wanted to show was what the unfunded impact to the utility board would be during these periods, and as far as what is not included in current rates. At 2020, it begins to flip.
Okay. So would you...
Or I'm sorry, 2030. 2030, it begins to flip. And that's because of the released revenues.
And so past year 11, and it was a little confusing to me, so if you could clear this up. Past year 11, we're no longer making payments to Rockwool, or up until year 13, we're making payments to Rockwool?
Then the utility board is going to get the revenues, and they 61% of it will go to O&M, and
Okay.
Probably the other portion will be available for additional debt service.
Do you know the number, the approximate profit per year? Once it's built out, once you have all these lines on there, all these projects, Harvest Hills and all that are put in here, do you know what the actual total gross revenues would be at that point?
Well, I used the years in the analysis because that is what's called for under Rule 5.5.
No, but I'm saying, what would be the gross revenue of the line when we're done paying for it? Or when we're done reimbursing Rockwool, based on these numbers? I got like 1.2 million or 1.3. Does that sound about right?
I'd prefer doing a calculation of that, just so I don't misstate. But I could certainly calculate that for you.
Well, the reason I ask is because if the operating cost is 61%, and once we're done repaying Rockwool, all these numbers add up to 1.27 million, okay? That's our total gross revenue, times 61%, cut that out. We get about $500,000 profit a year. And so in this calculation, we are out about 1.7 million, you say, after the 10-year repayment cycle to Rockwool. But if we do it the state's version and we pay it off over 23 years and 3 months, we get $0 after that, right? We've only been basically paying them off the entire thing.
Well,
We don't have any net profit if we do the state's funding, right?
You get 61% of the revenues every year.
How do we get 61% of the revenues? If
The O&M, the utility board retains that.
But I guess I don't see that in the agreement, that we get 61% past that.
I believe that's will be in the lease agreement.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, that is clearly detailed in the lease agreement, and that O&M calculation is evaluated every year, so if that changes, let's just say the cost of operation and maintenance decreases, it's evaluated every year, and that calculation.
But the lease agreement is between us and the building commission.
That's correct.
And the letter that the state gave us, it just said net revenue, just like the PSC says net revenue.
And that is gross revenues less 61% for O&M costs.
So they calculate it differently than the PSC.
No, what I'm saying is that for every dollar of revenues, the utility board will keep 61 cents for O&M, and 39 cents will go to the state to repay the bond issue. Just as a comparison, under 5.5, what is required to be reimbursed is the customer's gross revenues less the leak adjustment.
Okay.
The leak adjustment is about 8%, and that 8% compares to 61% under the bond issue.
So we don't then know what the actual revenue on the line is going to be once, in this portion, it's paid off after 10 years. We have no idea?
Oh, it'll keep growing, sir, I'm sure.
And about $500,000 a year, right?
I can't project how.
Well, I'm just saying, if you just add up all the different numbers here, you get $500,000 of profit a year.
How that carries on
would only grow,
after
it
the
wouldn't
reimbursement
decrease.
period, I'm not sure. The scope of the analysis was to take it through 5.5.
I guess, and let me back up and then I'll stop being a dead horse. After this repayment period to Rockwool, we owe them nothing else, correct?
That's correct.
And we retain the profit that we make on the line, correct?
Well, just a point of clarification, it's not profit. So it is the cost of running the utility
I understand.
outside of the O&M costs.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm saying, the profit. I'm not talking about the gross. I'm talking about gross minus O&M, minus the 61%.
Okay, yes, but not profit. It's,
Okay. In a traditional business, it would be the same as profit, correct? Revenue minus cost.
And it would
Okay.
be, it would be.
Here, we would pass it on to our ratepayer, correct? We would hopefully adjust the rates to pass that profit on to the ratepayer, correct?
You know,
Well,
I don't think you want to make
it's-
that statement 10 years out.
It's like, the utility board has three projects that we've talked about before. The Ransom Project, Flowing Springs, and the Charlestown Project. What generally happens would be that after the 61%, whatever surplus there is, would go towards debt service on a new project.
Yeah, we go into the general budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in any other business, they would call it profit that's then put back into the budget for something else. And I understand that a public utility is different than that. However, my point is, if it's making $500,000 a year plus another 13 years, that is actual money that we're recouping from the line. And we've already reimbursed Rockwool the max amount that we had to after 10 years. Whereas with the state, we're not net zero until 23 years. We can't have additional monies coming in until after 23 years. We have to pay them.
I understand that. The bond issue as it is designed right now certainly requires lease payments in excess of what 5.5 does for reimbursements. I mean, I believe it's 30 years, and you can see that the payback period is for 5.5 is 10 years, but each year you can divide up into 5 segments.
I understand that.
So let me interject something if I could. So under the 5.5, though, we would have to come up with money, the utility would have to come up with some upfront money, right? Until we've paid off the utility.
Yes, the utility would have to finance the utility share of the project, which is about $500,000, and somebody would have to pay this 42 cents per thousand, which all customers would end up paying it, because that 42 cents right now is not built into the rates.
Seems like in the long run, it may be more fiscally advantageous, but in the short run, first 10 years, rates are going to go up.
But that's done all the time with various bond issues, and that they call it leveling, that you see where one issue matures, and you use that to fund an additional bond issue for an additional project. So what I'm saying, more likely than not, that those future revenues will go right back into the system, and probably some type of upgrade project or something of that nature to pay the debt service on that.
But those are revenues that we would not have if we went with the state's financing, because we would just be netting out the O&M for the line and releasing the rest of the state for 23 years and 3 months, correct?
Well, that revenue is going to be free after 30 years. You're going to
After 30 years.
That's right.
Whereas with the 5.5 with Rockwool, it's free after 10 years.
You're correct on that.
It's just something to think about to my city council members, that after 10 years, we don't owe any more money if Rockwool pays for the line on the 5.5.
Correct, but in year 2026, we have to raise the rate by 72 cents.
How do you get 72 cents?
Right, bottom line. Because the 42 cents is an average over the entire 11 years.
Okay.
I believe it's approximate cost, it says 72 cents, or 20 cents, or 14 cents. I mean, yeah, we would have more money long time down the road, but today we wouldn't.
And
But
I guess,
just to give you
Okay, we do need to go back to the state and say, listen, I don't know if this 30 years is right. Maybe we need to go back to them.
that's a negotiating point.
Yeah, we can negotiate.
but it could also be a negotiating point with Rockwool.
Yeah, but I'm saying, we could say, look,
Well, Rule 5.5 is the PSC. I mean, that's a,
Yeah, certainly. If we went to alternate mainline extension agreement, it
Right.
could be a negotiation.
I'm saying we could go back to the state and say, listen, the terms aren't,
but
Big
one thing that council would ask, I think we talked about previously in regard to this freed up money is that we took a rough look at Flowing Springs, Ranson, and the Charlestown project, because, of course, the desire is to do as much as you can under the current rate structure without increasing it. And I think that if, including all three, we were coming down to barely meeting coverage or right at the minimum. During the payback years, under 5.5, it is going to constrain that and could require a higher rate adjustment, project-related rate adjustment.
So
Excuse me, John. You said coming down to the minimum. Were you talking about 115%?
Yes.
Okay, so that 115% is what? $150,000? What is it, that 115% that we have to maintain, which is basically a reserve?
No, it's not a reserve, but, and
It's
it's not a set amount, but it's your total debt service payments, or I'm sorry, your total cash available for debt service divided by your debt service payments on bond issues. And that ratio has to be maintained at 115% in accordance with your bond ordinances.
And we have to effectively keep that. Do you know what that rate is, or what that amount is now?
Yes, if you don't mind if I get another file from my...
Sure. Kristen, while Mike's taking a rest, could I ask you two more questions?
God
John,
forbid we
excuse
have
me.
a moment of silence or something.
I was looking at your map again, and just to be clear, you had said that regardless, if this line were to go in and the state were to pay for it, right now there would only be effectively 3 customers. It would be Rockwool on it, phase 1, I guess, and phase 2. And then there would be the Burr Park. And then there would be Shenandoah Junction, which I assume is the school.
No, Shenandoah Junction is a development that has a package plant currently that has been, that was incorporated into the design, assuming that they would connect eventually. I would, if it's okay, I will highlight the customers that could be connected to the line immediately. I didn't differentiate between those, but it's certainly more than 3 customers.
But Burr
You're-
Park
we're-
wouldn't be paying, would they? If it was the,
I think he's just asking about direct connections to the line, or how much, if you want to look at the flow, I can highlight those in the calculations that we've done.
Well, where I'm getting at is that even, I know those kids out in I went to Jefferson High. I mean, I know we use the bathroom a lot, but you add up Rockwool, you add up the Burr Park, and it comes to less than, I got about 88,000 gallons a day. We're building a capacity for 908,000 gallons per day?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
But to clarify, I would have to identify the immediate connections for you I'm, without going through and evaluating all of the existing customers, I don't know the exact number of what would connect immediately.
Okay, appreciate that. So the capacity that we'd immediately be putting into that line is less than 100,000 gallons per day, but we're building a
I
system
will
that's...
have to run the calculations for you to
900,000.
determine what would connect to, immediately on day one.
That would be great. The other question is, right across the road from Rockwool, of course, is North Jefferson, which I assume we're hooking up.
No.
And then right behind North Jefferson is Fox Glen with, what, 250 sewer septic systems. Are we hooking those up?
Those are not being hooked up. There is a connection to serve those in the future, but those, Fox Glen is currently on a private system, so we have provided the provision if at some point the developer or, HOA would want to connect those, they could, but we are not including that with this design.
Okay. And then the Miller property, which is north of the Rockwool property, is that part of the Jefferson Orchard site?
Not that I'm aware of, but what we did with the calculations and the sewer design is looked at, the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan, the Charlestown Sewer Strategic Plan, Ranson's development projections, and that is the basis of these properties being defined as future development within the northern region.
Okay, so we're not, this is not an imminent issue where we need sewer at those locations, because many of them have not even been built out and have, I assume, been planned over many years and have not still been built out.
Right, we're providing the main infrastructure line that those developments, future developments could connect to.
Okay, thank you.
I took a look at the consolidated utility as of June 30th of 2018 and factored in the 2018 A and B bond issues, and I did not factor in any other savings, which is probably an element of it, but the coverage was 136%.
And that comes to roughly what in terms of money?
If I could get
Well, no, I mean, just an estimate would be.
Told you it was going to be a boring conversation.
It'd be about, that in dollars would be roughly 760,000 over the minimum.
700 over the minimum.
Yes,
Okay, and then the minimum is 1.15.
1.5.
Okay. then I had another question, but it just, so you said we have a 130% rate that we're maintaining now?
In my analysis, I determined it was 136%, but that's a rough estimate.
Is that your plan? Sorry, I have not been as detailed in reading as Councilmember Brittingham, but is that 130% built into these numbers, that we would maintain that 130% as opposed to 115%?
No, there is, I think a certain amount of that would be factored into equalization between the PSD rates and the Ranson rates. That certainly is factored into providing for the Flowing Springs project, the Ranson project, and further out the Charlestown project. So the funds are earmarked.
Could I ask what Charlestown project? Is that one of the projects that's in our 2018 strategic plan?
I believe it is.
Yes, it's the renewal and replacement project that is defined in the 2018 sewer strategic plan.
That doesn't start until what, 2023?
We are moving forward into preliminary engineering. We'll be discussing that at the utility board meeting tomorrow. So hopefully we'll have that wrapped up by summer of this year, and we'll start understanding the costs associated with that. We're intending to have that built in 2020, 2021.
I'm a little confused, though, because you had said twice that you haven't done a lot of the preliminary work for the Flowing Springs project.
They're two separate projects.
Right, but you haven't done a lot of the analysis for the Flowing Springs project.
We don't know what the scope is yet.
Yeah,
We
But you're-
we need to find out what the scope is. Yeah.
but the rates, I'm concerned about how you're calculating the rates based on these projects all being added together, Flowing Springs, the consolidation, and the Route 9 project, and you're making projections on projects that have not been developed.
Yes, very, very rough estimates, very high level at this point.
So this is, John, a rough estimate.
Oh, it's a very rough estimate. It's based on estimate after estimate.
Yes, for future projections, growth projections, if we had
These build-outs are based on that, I believe, engineering study that
And that-
are they going to be achieved? Well, nobody knows what the economy is going to be like.
we could, if we had a boom, the repayment would happen much sooner than
And then
3 years.
you're also basing it on this document that you gave us a month ago with assumptions that we haven't agreed on that says future project costs are equally shared by all customers. So you're also basing it on these assumptions that we have not made decisions on.
But this analysis is totally separate from the discussions. What we're talking about is the state financing option and the revenue repayment structure, as well as the Rule 5.5 analysis, which is, based on just the Route 9 sewer project.
And potential impact to all ratepayers.
Correct.
Assuming all ratepayers
Correct.
take an equal burden, not just PSD or Route 9 area.
Right. Well, I was just trying to get to the
And
bottom of that
that
42 cents per 1,000 gallons assertion that you made
I'm
first
sorry,
thing.
what,
I was just trying to get to the bottom of where this 42 cents per 1,000 gallon.
the impact that has on the equalization is that 42 cents was never built into a cost of service study to develop rates. So it's really an unfunded cost of service, the 42 cents per thousand. And what it does, I am not saying that the utility board could not afford to subsidize this project under 5.5. What I am saying is that it puts more pressure on equalization, puts more pressure on projects to get them built with the lowest rate increase possible. It's going in the opposite direction of what equalization would be going.
Excuse me. Well, if you do sit down with Mike, I hope I can get an invite to that. I'd like to.
It's fun to crunch the numbers.
But to go back, Mr. Brittingham, to your question on freed up revenues, if you look at page 2 of 3, okay, you'll see, for instance, like the year 2021 reimbursement period is over 5 years, and then that annual amount gets freed up the next year. So you can simply add that initially in 2017 and then add to that the subsequent years.
Say that again. If I go to 2021, new EDUs per year, 2021.
You'll see that it's being reimbursed at a rate of 482, 48 per year.
Yep.
Okay, so 2027, that's free revenue to the utility board, not subject to reimbursement. And then in
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't really say that on here anywhere.
yeah, the next year, well, it's in that line item, less released revenues. That's how that line item was developed.
Then where does that go? That one, so like the operations and maintenance expense deficit, where does that get plugged in? Is that operation and maintenance expense deficit plus debt service equals total unfunded cost of service?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it includes the revenues that have been released under the 5.5 methodology.
Okay. So to go back to it then, after the 11-year period, we have then a deficit of 1.7 for the line, correct? Your bottom figure, your net unrecovered Rockwool reimbursement,
It's on the next page.
page 35.
He's 2 or 3. That's 2 or 3.
I'm sorry, they're just both kind of connected. It's tough to talk about one without the other.
1.7 million you're talking about.
Yeah, 1.735.
It's on your 2 of 3 page, I believe.
Or it's 1 of 3, actually.
Oh, 3
Well,
of 3, yeah.
okay, the O&M deficit is 1.537 million, and to that you'd add the required debt service on the utility share, and that's what totals the $1,923,000.
Yeah, I'm saying the total over the course of the entire project, where you have the summary, and it's on page 1 of 3 of yours. It's net unrecovered Rockwool reimbursement, bottom left figure.
Here.
The total amount that we're supposed to lose in the deal, if it's done on this analysis.
Would be the
1.7.
No, the 1.9. Is that what you're referring to? The unfunded
Net.
CTUP cost?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. 1.923. What I'm saying is after year 11, basically then we're trying to make up that 1.923 after that, correct?
That's correct. As the years progress, more revenues will be released.
Okay, and even if we don't add any more people after this last one that we hope to add, even if we don't add any more customers after that, it's about $500,000 a year additional revenues. So it'd take 4 years to pay off the 1.9, and we'd be at zero. And now we're up to year 15, and we're at zero. Whereas with the state financing, it's 23 years, 3 months to get to zero.
Well, the other consideration, though, is the impact to other projects that the utility board wants to accomplish under 5.5. So there is an impact with regard to the debt service ratio and funding of these other projects that we need to get done. So I think that certainly that would be a benefit of the state financing option. It would not negatively impact the ratepayers, nor would it impact other projects that we need to accomplish.
Correct. We wouldn't be taking out more loans
And,
in our bond issue.
Right.
Bond rate.
Any further discussion on this?
I got my page back.
Real quick, as far as negotiating, this might be for Mr. George, or as far as negotiating, who handles that? How does that work? How does that mechanism work?
Well,
that, if it would be a council vote on the lease agreement and the terms, that would need to be discussed with the building commission, and, the utility board could certainly bring up the issue with the state, if you would want to give that direction, or council and the building commission could propose an amendment to the 30-year term.
Gee, that sounds like fun. That's a moving parts.
Well, it was a moving part. So in the initial discussions with the state on the lease agreement, they came back and took the commitment term from 20 years to 40 years.
I was going to say, didn't we just do the opposite of that? I mean, isn't that part of the irony here now? Now we're saying we only want to pay after 20 years when initially we were not happy with the letter because it said 20 years when we were told the term was 30 years?
It said 40 years.
It said 40 years.
Yes.
We took it
40
down to
was in
30.
the initial.
Thank you for remembering that, because I was sitting here
lease
thinking.
agreement.
we're just-
Correct.
We actually
So
wanted
then
it 20
we-
years, but they came
Right.
back with 30.
We
With
had
30.
discussed 30 years, but then certainly after your comment, we did the exact calculations based on the difference from the original commitment letter, and that ended up to be about 23
Okay. Understood.
23 years, 8 months.
So you did the negotiating, then the Charlestown Utility Board did the negotiating with the state on that one?
So,
Service bond
staff
counsel.
worked with our legal counsel and bond counsel to draft the lease agreement. It was sent to the state, back and forth with comments, and we ended up with the 30-year term.
And the 23 years, 3 months, though, that's only if we were paying $450,000 every year, correct?
No, what that basically, it's just a direct comparison of the original commitment, which was $9 million at 20 years. If you look at a $10.5 million project, it ends up being the equivalent term would be 23 years, 3 months.
Yeah, 10 and a half at $450,000 is 23 years, 3 months, right?
So could we do analysis on this state funding, these numbers? Is there possible with the projected income, the 61%? Yeah.
Net repayment
Yeah, I haven't-
determined that the 10.5 million would be paid off in less than I forget the exact, but it was
I
a
can't remember.
20-year, it was under the 20-year period.
If everything went,
If
how
everything
everything
was
went.
per plan. So
Right.
that's obviously, that was a.
Paid it off in 20 years, not 20.
But you can pay the bond off early, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, let's just
They
say
would love that.
the economy booms and everybody's ready to connect, we could have it
Yeah, but
paid off in 10 years. I mean, it's
but
based
keep
on
in-
growth projections.
keep in mind, none of these customers have actually applied for service on this line, only Rockwool. I mean, as Mike pointed out,
That's not
No,
necessarily
that's not
true.
true.
well, the
because-
majority of them
yes.
are vacant, large developments that are in that analysis.
Have asked for sewer.
Have asked for
They have
service
asked for
through the
sewer
public service
connection.
district.
but currently are vacant large developments.
But
Yes.
if I,
Shenandoah Junction has roughly 200 units.
No, I
that would
understand,
be
but
a
I
direct
mean-
connection.
if I remember correctly, during the PSD consolidation, you brought to this council several spreadsheets that show that there had been requests for the EDS things that had been going on for 20-plus years, I think, in some cases, that had not been met. So we're building, I kind of go back to your map, we're building a $10.5 million sewer line to service, from what I'm adding up, less than a tenth of the folks that may actually exist, and 90% of this line is excess capacity that, as he pointed out, no one's hooked up to.
Other than Rockwool.
Well, like I said, please let me do the calculations for you. Right off the top of my head, I think that the industrial park with their 3 lift stations is roughly in the order of magnitude of 300,000 gallons per day. So, you know, the capacity there for those, I'll get you the calculations if you'd like to see those of the
Would.
existing
And then I'd also like to see, for all of these that you have in yellow, how long those permits have been with the PSD, or when did they make the original request for the EDS units?
Can I ask you, Mike, where you're going with this? Is it that your thought process is that we're building too big a line, that we're not going to need this capacity in the future? I'm not sure I'm following where you're going with this.
I think that's right. And then I'm also concerned that right next to these large users, potential users, are folks that potentially need that service that will not be getting any. I know the issue's there, but
I'd like to point out, okay, one of the reasons that we have Charlestown City developments that were being serviced by the PSD and the rates, and we went through consolidation, is because we had capacity issues. So when you look at expanded capacity as something in a negative tone, I have a little trouble getting there, because when we're in a position where a developer has to put in its own system or hook up to PSD, pay for its pump stations, the rate equalization we went through for Hunt Field, all 100% due to not having a capacity for development when it was ready to come online. So I just putting out an alternative dialogue there
it's
for you.
fair. But right now we're building a line that will be used by 10%.
Let's let Kristen do the numbers before we jump to that conclusion, and then we can have
It's
that.
in their map.
I think one other factor to consider is what's the difference of cost between building a line that's maybe 10% greater than the capacity, or this particular line, whatever percentage is.
Well,
And then it's a cost-benefit analysis is what we're talking about.
True, and hopefully you will all remember that when the original proposal came, it was about a $6 million project. The utility board, looking globally at the capacity issues in the region, fought for these improvements to be funded by the state. We felt strongly that, these are not pie-in-the-sky developments. These are what we feel are realistic growth projections that will service the northern region and a little bit of the eastern region for the next 30 years. Why not take advantage of that? Thankfully, the state has been working with us to achieve that.
But I would like to see, when did these developments apply for their EDS? I mean, how long have these EDS units been requested?
I'm sorry.
Or
what is
what's
EDS?
the capacity? EDUs, excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah,
I knew it.
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
All right, so to recap. Now,
I just, one last point, because I think one of the council members brought it up. The growth projections, new customers in the 5.5 calculation mirror what was shown in the bond calculation. They're the same growth projections in both.
Say that again.
The new customers and the new customer flow between the projection that was made for the bond issue and the calculation of 5.5 are the same.
Okay.
So as I was going to say, this whole topic, again, is about preparing to schedule a vote for the lease agreement. I mean,
So
that's
easy to get
that's the
sidetracked.
subject matter. Let's not forget that, right? So, again, we tried to address the questions that we thought we had at the last meeting. What I've jotted down here is Kristen is committed to identifying the immediate hookups and the flows. I think we want to know that. There still is the question of the West Virginia DEP permit modification, which we think we won't know until mid-February-ish. We don't have the form of the loan agreement yet, which has been asked for. But again, Mr. Stump is working on that. Hopefully we'll have something by February 4th. And at least there's been some discussion about the term, whether we're comfortable with the 30-year term, or whether council wants us to push back as staff a little bit harder on that to get that down to whether it's 20 years or 23 years or something like that. So to me, those feel like the issues that are sort of still out there. My question is, do we feel like we're any closer to setting a date for the vote, or are we?
I don't think we're close enough to set a date. I think we're going to need probably another workshop on this. I'd like to follow along on Mr. Brittingham's questioning on some of these numbers and see where they go. So,
right, we did certainly get the request that Councilman Brittingham and Tolbert would like to at least have a conversation with Mr. Kunkel and the utility board regarding the data.
Well,
So
and I think the workshop could be important too, because we need to go over some of the questions that we've previously asked, or the concerns that we've previously had and still haven't gotten answers to. When we pulled it seems people just forget about some of the things that don't make sense or don't add up. We asked Rockwool for their sewer bills from Byhalia, and it ended up being 200 to 400% higher than what they're telling us here. Their best answer was that they didn't see the transparency in their bills, and yet it's been 2 months since then, and we've had no follow-up with them. I mean,
But we did answer the question again that there's some limit on how much sewage they can put into the system, and that's driven by the permit modification.
no, there's how much industrial sewage. The question
sewage.
down in all those high usage numbers down in Byhalia were domestic use. They weren't industrial. And it was 200 to 400 times higher than these already high numbers that they gave us here. And still no answer from them. I can tell you what, if I was paying a $9,000 a month sewer bill, I'd figure out if it was 200 to 400% off.
Sure.
Additionally, they know that we made a big deal about it here. At least I did. I would assume if you're Rockwool, I would love to come back and laugh in Councilman Brittingham's face and go, ha, you were wrong. So I find it hard to believe that they haven't figured out the answer to that question or know the answer.
Well, to address that issue, that is why we requested a flow meter on the domestic flows. The sewer availability letter was drafted for the domestic use that they had provided us. So in the event that they exceed what they had provided in their application, they will pay for that. They will pay for any increase in capacity if it exceeds what's going into the line.
Could we get the actual building plans, the plumbing schematics from them? I mean, isn't that,
I would assume you could request that.
can CTUB get that for us?
So-
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen portions. I don't have them. I mean,
The reason I ask is because,
council could request.
Would that have been part of the building permit request then with Ranson? Is that the place? Okay.
Yes.
So I will follow up and see if we can get a copy of that document.
So what questions need to be answered for this, to setting a date?
Probably, well, the permit modification would be kind of handy. Do we know when?
Well, and one of the things that we had covered in the summary was that, again, getting back to the permit modification being issued, if it's not issued, then the funding is not available, nor would sewer availability be available.
So that's not even a question that
Yes,
we're waiting
yeah.
for. I mean, in theory, so
Ron?
what other questions do we need answered? I mean, I'm asking.
Oh,
I agree. I felt like at the last meeting, we were trying to get down to
Right.
the final questions that we wanted answered. I think most of them got addressed tonight that we asked.
Well, I would say,
It opened up one new issue with regard to the developments that are going to be served, the customers immediately online. You can get that to us. I guess the question is, what else? If there is a desire to go towards a shorter-term loan, it would be good to be able to tell them that, to pursue that tonight.
I think it'd be good, I think we obviously at least need the financing agreement. We still have yet to see that. Been asking for that for
Of
months.
course, that's here, that's on the list. So it's identifying the hookup and flow issues, the loan agreement, and some clarity on the permit, which again, I think we're all saying is out of our control in the sense of either it's going to be issued or it's not going to be issued. And we know that's going to happen within the next month. And then I think this other unsettled question of whether we'd like to look at pursuit of an even lower term than 30 would have been nicer to have this discussion when we were at 40 and moved down to 30, but whether we want to have some projections associated with fewer years.
Well,
I don't know that I'd feel prepared to say necessarily I don't think it hurts to see.
I mean, based on your quick analysis, I would like to see if we can negotiate a shorter term. And I think reasonably would be 25. I'm just going to throw out the 25 years because that's, yeah, plus it's a little bit higher than, so I think that's a reasonable expectation. But again, even the term really doesn't impact whether or not we vote for this thing.
Correct.
Or how the sewer is going to be put in or anything. The only thing that would impact it is if the customer says, I'm not going to build here, right? I mean, realistically speaking.
Right, and then everything's contingent on the permit anyway, so if there's no permit, there's no financing.
Right.
I mean, just looking at the calendar, is February 19th, is that plausible to have all our ducks in a row? Is that enough time?
I guess my thought process was the first meeting in March, only because of the DEP could be resolved by then, the permit issue could be resolved by then. I feel like, yeah, I mean, that was my thought process. I mean, I don't know that these can be answered by February 19th, but I also don't want to wait for something else to come up. I mean, we got a couple more issues here tonight. If we schedule for March, then builds in a little bit of leeway just in case.
I agree with Ann. I think that gives us some time, and it gives us time to go over the information.
I don't know that we leave it on the agenda as a vote schedule, but maybe we leave it on the agenda as an item for follow-up to questions that are pending, as opposed to a vote, and go ahead and schedule the vote for first meeting in March.
I think it's time to kind of move off dead center one way or the other on this. And what concerns me, which is what you're saying, I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying. What concerns me is this loan that's accruing interest every month. And you don't want to jump into anything, that's for sure, and we got to get all this information. But if we're just kind of spinning our wheels, waiting for a more opportune time, I don't know. And I'm not saying we have been. I'm not saying we're going to be. But I think when you get to the point where we've beat the horse, there's no more beating the horse, then we have to make a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, I think the first meeting in March would be the time to make the decision one way or the other. But at least for me, there's still quite a few things I want to review, and as I know when we get things in, I do want to take considerable time reviewing those documents. So for me, first meeting in March would sound good.
I don't want to go pretty much further than that because we have budget that we have to start working on.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be our first budget workshop too, so that's going to be a doozy.
So one thing to keep in mind, if we do change the venue for the meeting, if we wanted to make it CW Hall, we talked about that, maybe is the day to make sure everybody in the community who has an interest. It will require a vote of City Council to move the meeting to a different location. So we'll still have time to do that, but I'd certainly be interested in members' thoughts on whether or not they'd want to move to a bigger location for the meeting, for the vote itself. So, again, we don't have to
Yeah.
decide that tonight, but,
Let's bring that up for the next meeting.
okay.
So at this point, do we want to, wants to make a motion to set the date for the vote, first meeting in March?
Is it going to include the negotiation for the term as well?
Yes.
We'll direct staff to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I move that we schedule the vote for the 4 March meeting. I think that's the first meeting in March.
I think you're right. Yep.
Yes, yes, okay.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
All right.
And thank you, Kristen. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.